Live from Los Angeles to stations up and down the West Coast and nationwide on iHeart Radio. This is KLEAN Radio, and it starts right now.
That's our show today, because our opening is so long. How long is that opening?
It's getting longer. I don't know. I think Rand likes his own voice.
Rand DeWitt.
Yeah.
It was somewhere around here in my ear. But welcome to KLEAN Radio. And this is the kind of show that you can listen to live as you're doing now. And we thank you because the Golden Globes are on and the football's over now. But you can watch it 24/7 on KLEANradio.com. Let's do the traffic, and we'll get to Andrew. And we have a great guest tonight, a great guest. So we're on Talk Radio 790. That's KABC 790, as you're listening to it here, maybe, in iHeart Radio. We're all up and down the West Coast. We're soon to be in New York and all over the country, and we're soon to have a television show. A lot of big things are happening here. You can call our show at 800-222-5222. We like to think of it as a New York taxi number, but as Andrew pointed out last week, no one ever calls a taxi in New York. You'd have to be a moron, right? Now you just walk outside, right? Well, don't you?
I wonder
live
if they
there.
would actually come. If you, I mean, maybe the
Probably think
Lower
it was
East
a
Side.
joke. Get an
Lower
Uber.
East Side, they might come.
Get an Uber. KLEANradio.com or at Facebook.com/KLEANradio. Twitter at KLEAN Radio. I am POB Pat O'Brien. Andrew is at KLEAN CEO. This is the lamest. Is that your handle?
Why is that so lame?
Oh, your name's Andrew Spanswick, and you're a big deal. Oh, but you're branding.
With a name like Spanswick, it's easier to go with clean.
Anyway, welcome to the show tonight. We're going to talk about a lot tonight, as a matter of fact. And Gary Stromberg is our guest. We'll get to him in about a minute. He was in the center and still is in sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and now addiction. He's a gem of recovery, and I love him. I've known him forever. We'll get to that in a second. But I want to talk about this football weekend because the two big games are over now. Green Bay will go up to Seattle next weekend and get slaughtered. And Indianapolis will go into New England.
That's great.
It's the and I'd root for Green Bay. Well, actually, no. I guess I root for Seattle. I don't know.
Really?
It's Green Bay at Seattle, and then Indianapolis at New England. Huge matchups for the NFC and AFC Championship. I used to cover these. And Andrew Spanswick, how are you, Andrew?
I'm good, Pat. How are you?
I had a good week. We had a good week. We did a lot of work this week, and found a couple of lamps to buy.
Lots of lamps.
And a
tree.
Yeah, a tree,
palm
and all
tree.
kind of stuff. It's
amazing what you can do with recovery. You can go out and shop.
Andrew's an addiction expert, and let's start seriously about football, because this weekend, next weekend, and then the Super Bowl are the biggest gambling weekends in America.
That's right.
This Super Bowl, they're estimated to gamble maybe over $100 million. This weekend, if you're an addictive gambler, and I'm not talking about you folks that have office pools or are gambling and you can handle it, you're not losing your house. I'm talking about people who lose things. And we deal with that, too, at the KLEAN centers, right?
Yeah, there's process addictions, which are similar to regular chemical dependency addictions in that the mind works and the same receptor sites get activated that makes people become addicted to the process, and they start losing things in life like you would with alcohol or drugs. So, we see, it's a progressive problem for most people that can't handle it, and we do treatment for that. Process addictions like overeating, gambling, sex and love addiction, these are all process addictions, and so those are all part and parcel with what we deal with.
And it's all really under the same umbrella. I mean, you come into one of our centers, and you can take a specific problem. Let's make that clear.
Yeah, I mean, we can, but honestly, it's rare. I mean, once we find out that someone's even a gambling addict, normally we quickly find out that there's other types of addictions going on. And that's a big part of what we do is we screen people, and then we get to the base of what's really going on, try to figure out things from the start. And it's tough to do sometimes.
It's Golden Globes weekend, and I'm a selfish addict this weekend, so I'm dealing with that. And I ignored some people that I shouldn't have, and that's not good.
You're apologizing on the air to your...
This is an apology. I've made my apology.
Okay, this is
now it's worse.
It's just like a public outing of yourself is the guy.
I made a mistake, and I can't.
Made a mistake? Okay.
I made an amends, and I can't seem to get a return.
Okay.
Our guest today is Gary Stromberg. Now, Gary and I have known each other. Gary, is this possible? 44 years.
Boys, who would have believed?
Well, we should be dead.
Yeah, that's what I meant by who would have believed.
But Gary, if you're into rock and roll, you know Gary, at least peripherally. He's been a guest on the show, right, Andrew, before I got here?
Actually, I've just met him up at Wonderland, and we've talked in the past a lot.
Okay.
So.
Gary was involved in rock and roll at the highest level. And he...
Figuratively and literally.
Well, we'll get to that. One of the greatest offices in the history of rock and roll. He had an office on Sunset Boulevard that, as the Eagles would say, everything all the time in that office, right?
That's what I was known for.
Okay. Well, no, you were. You were a brilliant public relations man, and Gibson Stromberg was the big one. The Stones, Pink Floyd, the Doors, Steppenwolf. I mean, he had everybody, and everybody came through. We met through Dr. Hook and the Medicine Show. Remember that guy?
Oh, my goodness.
Cover the Rolling Stone.
Wow.
And I became his hero because I got them on the Huntley-Brinkley Report somehow.
Wow.
In 1970, that's all. Anyway, we've known each other 44 years, and then the roof caved in on you. What happened?
Yeah, it caved in is the right word. Went down the drain. I was running as fast as I could for as long as I could, but like I've heard over and over again now in recovery, I ran out of juice, and it turned on me, and it all caved in.
And we can blame it, Andrew, on the Times, because a lot of people say, not the New York Times, although I'd like to sometimes.
There's an LA Times, too.
But the book is called The Harder They Fall, and it's still selling, paperback and hardback. The Harder They Fall, about celebrities, rock and roll stars, politicians, literature people, real-life stories about addiction. But, when we talk about the time that Gary and I, and to some extent you're younger than we are, aren't you?
Just barely, I think.
But you know what I'm saying, 60s, 70s, that culture didn't give us a redemption song.
No, it's been an interesting thing. There's so much wrapped up with drug, sex, and rock and roll, and the piece that everybody seems to leave out of it is the word politics, which really seems to be where it all ends up. And while it might be a party anthem or a way of living, and certainly all the different subcultures have developed out of music and out of culture surrounding music, and it's always been very important. But overall, what we're dealing with is that
What happened? Did you lose your audio?
I don't know. Yeah.
Well, let's talk to Gary
Sorry.
about it. So you have all these guys, Paul Williams and Congressman Ramstad, and
here's what came to mind when you brought this up, Pat. We were brought up in an era when recovery wasn't on the radar screen. I was led to believe that we were being lied to by the establishment. Drugs I was told, were dangerous. They were going to lead to all kinds of bad things. And my truth, when I started as a young man, was that it didn't lead to anything bad. It led to great times.
Fun.
Yeah, it was. It was a method of exchange. Drugs got you things that you wanted. Alcohol got you, it made you feel like you were something important, that you could talk better, that you were handsomer, all the things that, that I wanted from my life, drugs and alcohol provided. And I was not aware of any consequences. I never heard of the word recovery.
Yeah, and nobody brought it up, right?
There was no such thing as recovery. And there wasn't any end in sight either. We were led to believe, those of us who were inside of this lifestyle, but thought that it was going to go on forever. I never thought that anything bad was going to happen to me as a result of this. I thought I found the magic secret to living a great life, and little did I know that eventually this would turn on me, and that like so many others of my generation, I would go down the drain with this.
And Harder They Fall off the song, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Is that Richard, who was it, Cliff? Jimmy Cliff?
Yes.
One of those. Oh, we still have some brain cells left. But you make a good point, because there you are in the middle of it more than almost anybody, surrounded by all these big rock stars, and people come over to your office, but
even people on the periphery that were getting high and just having fun. There was really nothing that led us to understand that there was danger ahead. And a big part of it, and I started with this, a big part of it was that we didn't believe what the establishment was telling us. They were telling us all kinds of lies. That I was going to become addicted to marijuana. It was going to lead to hard drugs. I smoked marijuana for a long time before anything bad ever happened,
right,
or before I went into any other kinds of drugs. I was handling my drugs and alcohol, and they were leading me to believe that I couldn't handle it, or their bad things would happen to me. So they lied to me about whether this was dangerous. Then I just believed that everything they were telling me was a lie. These weren't addictive drugs.
Andrew, in your experience, I don't know if it goes on as much as that now, but I think still a lot of people have that feeling that, hey, it's not going to happen to me. I did.
Yeah, I mean, part of it also is that for a while you don't have a problem with it. You know, you're just using it, and there might be some consequences, but they're not big enough for you to associate it with you just being a jerk, or whether it's actually the drugs or alcohol. And then I think what people realize is that consequences get bigger and bigger and bigger as their drug use increases. And then all of a sudden, at some point, there's an awakening that there's a connection between the two parts, and that hopefully results in people wanting to get better.
And when you start out as a young person, you know, you're physically fit and strong, and you can absorb more punishment. You know, as you get older, it takes more of a toll on you.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, most of the people that I know did this for a long time until it started to get bad. I was 40 years old before, you know, when I got sober.
Yeah.
One thing that's interesting, though, is we're seeing with younger people getting into recovery, because the drugs are becoming so much more concentrated. And so the amount that people are using when they start is much, much higher. So the tolerance is also built more quickly. And there's a plethora of other types of drugs. It's not just like marijuana, it's opiates and whatever, and they're mixing these all together. So it's really a different experience for a lot of people now. I think it's accelerated the addiction process with all these poly-drug addiction out there. So
Gary Stromberg is our guest. Everybody, I mean, I remember bringing a bag of mescaline to a Flying Burrito Brothers concert at the cellar door. Handed it out to everybody. I mean, it's like we didn't think twice. But tell us the story before we get into a little more serious things, because there are consequences. And by the way, give us a call at 800-222-5222, 800-222-5222. The Gracie Slick story is fantastic.
Before I tell you that, I just want to back up just a bit, though. When I first started on the Sunset Strip in like 1965, maybe, I was very heavily into psychedelics, and Aldous Huxley was my guru. And he wrote a book called Doors of Perception.
Sure.
And in that book, he talks about the people that took these psychedelics were inner astronauts exploring inner space. And I used to tell people that that's what I was going to be, was an inner astronaut. You know, I was the Johnny Acid seed of the Sunset Strip.
oh my God.
Well, I used to hang out with Timothy Leary.
Yeah.
I did his acid. Think
Wow.
about that.
I
Well, these
can't
were
believe
guys-
I'm sitting
they
in
were
a room
street
with
people.
two guys that have done that kind of acid.
And are still here.
When I say it's good at. But anyway, so the Gracie Slick story.
Gracie Slick, yes. Okay, well.
I should
Grace-
say who Gracie is, because
Oh, my
nobody.
God.
Yeah.
Grace Slick was the lead singer of the Jefferson Airplane, one of the seminal groups in rock and roll history. She was probably not the first, but one of the first female lead singers.
Her and Janice, yeah.
Her and Janice, yeah. And Gracie came from a very well-to-do family in San Francisco. Her real name was Grace Wing, and the Wing family in San Francisco were very conservative Republicans, very wealthy, and she grew up knowing from the get-go that there was something wrong in this family, that she didn't belong, and that she was just the black sheep in the family. And when she graduated high school, they asked her what she wanted to do, and her response was, "I want to get as far away from you as I can." So they settled on sending her to this small upstate New York school called Fitch College.
Huh.
It's a small liberal arts school, upstate New York, 500 students maybe. And she went back there. She studied for a year. College wasn't for her. She got heavily into drugs and started singing and experimenting. And after a year of college, she dropped out. She hitchhiked her way back to California, where she joined up with the people that were to become the Jefferson Airplane, and the rest is kind of rock and roll history. But curiously, at Fitch University, or Fitch College rather, a few years after Grace Wing left, Tricia Nixon, President Nixon's daughter,
Right.
went to school there. And upon graduation returning to her family, Richard, who was then president of the United States, she decided to throw a reception for the graduates, the students at Fitch College. So in the mail one day, Grace Wing receives an invitation to a formal tea at the White House being given by Tricia and Richard Nixon.
Wow.
So like any good radical of the time, she called her then best friend, Abby Hoffman, who was
One of the Chicago Seven, a
One-
big radical back in the
Yes.
60s.
And said, "Guess what? We're going to the White House." So the two of them devised a plan whereby they were going to dose the President of the United States, Richard Nixon, with LSD. Grace said that, she said, I'd been to many formal teas in my family. I knew how these things were conducted. And she said, most likely there'd be a reception line with the president there. He'd have a beverage of some kind. And she said, and the guests would be led through this reception line. And she said, I'd have the LSD in my hand. And when I got a chance, I'd drop it right in his drink, and he'd never know what hit him. So the two of them, Abby Hoffman and Grace, made this blood vow. They're going to do this. They're going to dose the president. He goes out and rents a tuxedo. She buys a dress. The big day comes. They're in the line, and it's exactly as she had speculated. There's Richard Nixon, President of the United States, standing in line next to his daughter, Tricia. He's drinking a beverage. She's got the LSD in her hand. They're looking at each other, and they cannot wait to get up into the front of the line.
What for? Was it a tab or was it dropper or something?
It's probably a tab.
I was thinking window pane, right?
Right.
Something that would dissolve quickly.
Right, quickly. I'm trying to figure out how to give the president LSD here. Okay.
So, and she said she was excited beyond belief. She's going to dose the president. They're moving their way through the line when all of a sudden...
She could have killed all of us. You know that, right?
We could have. That's right. He would have started a war.
Go ahead.
All right.
He could have. That's right. So she's approaching the president when two Secret Service agents come up gently behind her, each grabbing an elbow, and they gently remove her out of the line, and they say, listen, we know who you are, and we think you're a threat to our president.
Wow.
And they escorted her out of the White House. The irony of this story is that nobody recognized Abby Hoffman, who was in the process.
Who was a threat.
Yes, who was it? He was blowing up. He wanted to blow up everything.
Right.
Abby Hoffman went through and actually ended up shaking hands. There's a picture somewhere in the world of Abby Hoffman shaking hands with President Nixon.
Well, how do we know she didn't?
Here's the aside.
To Nixon's administration, maybe he was on acid.
Well, that's what he said.
It would have explained a few things.
An aside to this story, which I had never heard before, was that Richard Nixon was a known insomniac and was known to get up in the middle of the night and walk around the White House and have conversations with the portraits of dead presidents. So she theorized that he would come on to this acid. He would start tripping, and the staff would say, "Oh, there's Richard just acting up."
Right,
Richard
there
again.
was no difference. That's a great story. The Harder They Fall is the book by Gary Stromberg and Jane Merrill, and it's great. It really is. Andrew, what do we learn from? And we've got a call. Hold on, we got a bunch of calls, so hold on. But what do we learn from? Everybody says, celebrities, blah 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 blah. But there is a lesson there because they are the ones who come out and talk, and I should probably ask both.
And they have a platform.
And they have a platform.
Yeah.
But Andrew, what should we learn from these nightmarish stories from celebrities?
Well,
I'm talking about the Whitney Houstons and the Michael
certainly
Jackson.
A lot of people think that, and it's true. There's being poor is terrible, and being really rich, believe it or not, has a downside too. One of the things with celebrities is that they get all this access, wealth. And while they seem spoiled by it and they get all this attention, in fact, they're actually sheltered from getting real good advice and treatment. And we see this a lot. So there's a lot of people that depend on celebrities to function. So we continue to medicate them and do whatever and let them do what they want. There's all these people economically that need them to work.
Enabling them.
And they enable them. And we see this in other types of jobs as well. But it's interesting that we see it play out in the media with celebrities more. But in the past, there's been a lot of agendas. There's always been agendas, about, what to do. And but now we're really focused, I think, on things, being much more clear and just, really working well with celebrities and doing things properly.
Let's take a call. Gary Stromberg's our guest, and Andrew's here. I'm here. Rick up in Portland. Hey, Rick, how are you?
I'm good, brother.
What's going on, man? You got a question or
a
comment?
Not really a question. I just, I wanted to just let you know that I appreciate what you're doing. I think there's a lot of us, from that generation. I was born in 51, and
you're right there.
I was 18 in 69, so, and I was real, naive at the time. I started drinking beer when I was, probably 14, and then I migrated to some dirt weed. I lived up in Canada and Ontario, and the weed was terrible dirt weed up there at that time, and we had the best hashish in the world, though, so I migrated into that, and me and my buddy used to run up to Toronto and score quarter pounds and bring them back and sell nickel.
And how are you doing now?
Nickel grams, and I'm doing pretty good now. I mean, I've still got my share of addictions. I've sorted things out pretty good as far as what I can and can't handle, and I've learned how to moderate. I'm pretty much a beer drinker now. I do have the occasional
Right.
couple of shots of tequila or whiskey or whatever, but
Well,
long story short, I think there's a bigger issue at hand here, and not to diverge from the subject, but the propaganda media we have in this country right now is just unbelievable. And the truth is so hard to find. Thank God for YouTube and alternate media.
All right, no, and that's what we're here for. Thank you for the call. And there's another problem too, is that you can't pick and choose what you're going to take if you have an addiction problem, right? You can't say I want to have a beer. I don't mean to pick on Rick, but
Right.
But you can't have a beer, and you can't. What am I trying to say? You can't try to define alcoholism to yourself, right?
Certainly not, no. I mean, alcoholism is defined by some specific criteria of people using the substance to the point of addiction, and where there's physical and psychological and societal
No, we're okay.
Okay. I keep getting feedback, so I don't know. Anyway. So
Well, it's okay.
consequences. So my last word was consequences, but it was...
Either that, or you're getting you're having flashbacks.
No,
Maybe
it was
it's
like
not
echoing in my ear. It's
Okay,
like,
all right.
Okay.
But Gary, back in the day, and Gary and I have coffee every Saturday morning, and we talk about everything. And but it's just so interesting that we never had any of these conversations back then, and now it's all changed. So if you say that I'm having a problem, any kind of problem. And I bring it up to you, we can talk about it for an hour.
Well, recovery has changed our lives.
Yeah.
Like I said, I mean, when we first started, there was no consequences. I didn't know there would be consequences. And then there finally were consequences, and then the consequences got to be really consequential and crashed and burned.
And you
I
lost
found
a lot, didn't you?
I lost pretty much everything.
Yeah.
And found my way into recovery, and now I've had a remarkable life for the past 32 years. As a sober man, and I think what's unique about our generation is that we're able to tell these stories, and hopefully for the benefit of young people coming along behind us, who may in fact hear that there are consequences and there are risks involved in the kind of usage that we used to do.
And it's a matter of seeking help. We have a phone number, 888-601-6040, 888-601-6040. It's a 24/7 helpline. But, Andrew, I know at the KLEAN Center, we spent a good amount of time over there this week. Mm-hmm. Those things didn't happen back when Gary was talking about this back then. I mean, you can now just basically call a number and almost over the phone identify that you might have a problem and come on in and see, Well,
we actually owe a lot of what happened in the 60s and early 70s and the development of helplines and treatment lines. And a lot of these things started especially from people overdosing on drugs. And there were, a lot of volunteer drug sort of community services. And now we've evolved really, though, into a nation who understands this is a big problem. It's not a new problem. It's not going away. But we're learning a lot all along the way, and we're much better for it on a treatment perspective, and there's a lot of hope out there.
KLEANradio.com, KLEAN Radio. We're live all across the country. Thanks for all your calls and help. We'll be back in a minute. Gary Stromberg is here, who was in the middle of it all in the 60s and 70s, and now he's a beacon of recovery for a lot of people. And Andrew and me, we're back to talk more about this later.
Are you addicted to drugs or alcohol, but unable to commit to an inpatient rehab stay? Introducing KLEAN Treatment Center's Outpatient Treatment. This drug and alcohol treatment program is designed specifically for the working professional. Don't let your commitments of running a business, taking care of a child, or maintaining your college classes get in the way of your recovery from addiction. With daytime, evening, or individualized programs, KLEAN's Outpatient Treatment will fit your life. Call now for a free screening. Professional guidance is standing by.
Hi, everybody. I'm Pat O'Brien. Hello, YouTube. Thanks for joining the KLEAN Radio channel. Be sure to subscribe and get weekly episodes and clips. And comment, like or dislike, whatever. Be nice. We respond to everything. Welcome back, Pat O'Brien, along with Andrew Spanswick. We're KLEAN Centers and KLEANradio.com. a show you can watch and listen to 24/7, and we hope that you do. Gary Stromberg is our guest, and Gary was the man behind Car Wash. What a movie! You actually was the last person to make money on a soundtrack, right?
That soundtrack paid for the movie.
Yeah. Back in those days, who all was on the soundtrack? Rolls Royce?
Rolls Royce, yeah.
Norman
Whitfield.
Norman Whitfield
was the producer. I sold that movie on the basis that Norman's worst album that he ever made for Motown sold over 1 million albums. So that if he made the soundtrack for a movie and it sold 1 million copies, it would pay for the movie.
Right.
So
it's like when Disney figured out they could sell figures of the Lion King and that sort of thing. Anyway, it's time now for our social media report. If you can find us in all the Golden Globe tweets. But Buddy Totten is here. Buddy, how are you?
I'm good. How you doing?
What do you got? Let's go.
All right. So Steven says, Pat, I've been sober for 6 months, and my fiance and I are due to get married in 2 weeks, but my bride-to-be just relapsed. Do I call off the wedding? What would you suggest I do?
I would say get her some help, and I'm going to turn this one over to Andrew, who's getting married in a couple of weeks.
It's really not fair to do that.
But no, what do you do in that situation? I mean, you try to help her, but
yeah,
we don't know the extent to which she's fallen off the wagon. But
yeah, I mean, that's a tough one for me to say. You know, with so little information, it's almost impossible to give good advice. But
let's narrow it down to your partner relapses. What do you do?
The first thing is to go back to what might have worked in the past that got them sober before they relapsed. Reconnecting with the people that know them well already, and being able to then try and cut down the length of the relapse so that you mitigate a lot of the harm.
All right, cancel the wedding?
No.
Okay, no,
I would
say don't. I think that would make it worse, right, Gary?
Yeah.
Get to the bottom of it, figure it out. If you're going to get married to someone that has this problem, get used to it. You know, it's going to be something you're going to be dealing with. And if you don't understand that, then you don't understand the chronic nature of the condition.
All right, who else's life can we run here?
Yeah, right.
All right, so Jake has a bit of a dilemma. He says, Pat, I'm a heavy equipment operator with 2 years clean, and I caught my fellow driver operator at work getting loaded. I told him I wouldn't say anything, but I don't feel safe working with him. What should I do?
This day and age, absolutely turn him in. I'm serious. I'm strict about that. I say, you know, back in the day, Gary, when you were dealing with all these rock bands, if somebody had a problem, you said, okay, great, better music. But and that was heavy equipment too. But today,
there's no wiggle room here.
I hate to be a cop, but you just turn them in, right, Andrew?
Yeah, you know, and this is one of the things that's coming up more and more, you know, especially with legalization of marijuana in a lot of states, is that, you know, people are impaired more, and it's more obvious in the workplace. And so the legal question of what's acceptable and what's not doesn't necessarily mix with what's legal and what's not. And so, you know, these are things that we're going to have to start working out as like medical marijuana comes in and legalize recreational marijuana. Because there's definitely issues with drug use in the workplace, and it's never worth risking a life. And if someone's got a problem, all you're going to do is help them out by having them meet some consequences for what might be going on.
It could kill you.
Yeah.
Or injure you. One more. You got another one?
I do. Mary asks, how do you feel about dual diagnosis, meaning which comes first, the addiction or the mental disorder?
Well, if we knew that, we'd be Stephen Hawking.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, once again, that's the thing where obviously it could be, you know, simultaneously. We see a lot of that. People will take drugs and they'll get what we call drug-induced psychosis. So sometimes there can be a consequence to taking drugs that also creates a psychiatric condition beyond the use of the drug. But, you know, this is a line, you're right, where it's chicken and egg. For the most part, it doesn't really matter. You have to deal with what you have.
Buddy, you left the pin in the grenade one more time. Thank you.
All right.
Good job. That's our social media expert. You know, this is Clean Radio, and our number is 800-222-5222, and we have helplines. And our IOP center is open. What is that, Andrew?
It's our intensive outpatient programs. We've got several actually, but we're just opening up in Portland, Oregon, and we're already open in West Hollywood, California, as well as Astoria, Oregon. And basically, it's outpatient services are a lot like residential treatment services, except you just come in 2 to 5 days a week and you live at home. So, and most people work as well or keep their lives going.
So if you're working or raising a kid or going to school.
Yeah, and also it's for people that maybe aren't like fully bottomed out alcoholics and realize though that they're developing a problem and they want to fix it before it gets out of control. We get a lot of people that are sort of starting to face some consequences of the drug or drinking use, and then they decide to, on their own, get help earlier than what we consider most cases, which are the most tragic cases where people need intervened upon or have a huge crisis before they get help.
Our offices are right across from the Roxy. They used to be owned by Gary Stromberg. Didn't you start
the
Rainbow?
Rainbow.
The Rainbow Room. I'm sorry. Didn't you start
Rainbow
that?
Bar and Grill.
Yeah.
A lot of damage was done in that place.
I go to meetings there now.
I know.
But that
How
upstairs
ironic.
room there, that was, man. I don't even know how to. And it's still, and it's so ironic that there are recovery meetings there now. But
It
man,
sure is.
That was back in the day when we were running around.
I remember Michael J. Pollock. Remember him?
Absolutely.
He came in there one night and ordered a 6-pack of tequila to go.
Yeah, why not?
6-pack of fifths of tequila.
I was there with Nielsen, all those guys, Lennon and
Nielsen.
May Pang, and oh man. So let's talk about this. There's actually some breaking news about, and this is right down your wheelhouse, Gary. That now they're saying the government's put out the Drug Policy Alliance. What is that, Andrew?
Basically, there's an attempt to put all of government sort of policy, whatever, into this one department, and then they sort of come after different people.
And as we're coming up to a full season again of summer rock festivals and rock concerts, they're now saying that producers of raves, I would think this is more for raves, but anyway, concerts and festivals have a little more common sense at reducing harm at concerts. Gary, your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know so much about the
Harm caused by drug abuse.
Yes, I understand that, but I don't understand the responsibility of the promoters in that regard and what can be done. But I have a kind of an offbeat take on this thing that maybe I could share. That what I found consistent throughout all of my years in this business with artists was the belief that drugs and alcohol somehow made you more creative, and that this was the motivator for my performance. And it just turns out that it's not true in any way. And so many people that I've come across have this reliance and this belief that I need to be loaded before I can perform.
And on the other side of that is that people who go to concerts think they need to be loaded to listen to them.
That's the extension of that, because their heroes are the ones that are doing it. But the people that I know in music and in all of the arts that are clean and sober now have discovered what a fallacy that was, that their talent was their talent.
I think a lot of it was also justification and rationalization for drug use. I mean, as much as as much as artists say that, alcohol and drugs is their muse to some extent, I think a lot of them know that they're less productive at the heart of it in terms of what they do and what work they get done. And, as I've seen, like, my friends...
What do you mean less productive?
Just, being loaded all the time. You can't get work done, So while you might have a creative moment, you're really not being very productive. And so, like I talked to some of the guys that are more my generation and, famous musicians, and they're like, they wasted 10, 15 years of their lives when they could have now, been just as capable of doing the work they were doing, but more of it. And so they feel like they've lost all this opportunity to write music.
Well, that's such an important message.
Yeah, and Gary and I sit with guys who everybody knows, but I mean, in the book you had Alice Cooper, who is an example of this, who got actually better once he started drinking, stopped drinking a gallon of vodka every day.
Yeah, I can tell you a good Alice story. Alice was a beer drinker primarily and drank for years and years and years. And when he finally gave up alcohol, he had a concert that night, the very first night that he was going to perform without alcohol. And he went to he said that the character that he created, Alice Cooper, was a character of his creation. And he got to the venue that night, first sober night. He got there very early because he wanted to plan out what his concert was going to be like, what his show was going to be like, sober. And he started pacing back and forth. He was getting into his makeup and all, and he got more and more frightened as the hour approached for this concert to begin. He had no idea what was going to happen, and he went out on the stage, and he was terrified. just terrified. He had never been faced an audience sober before. And he said an entirely different persona came out of him, one that he never even knew existed. It's the Alice Cooper that he is today, this kind of crazy, kind of fake evil.
Switch it on and off.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it just came out naturally, whereas before it was all contrived, and he's been performing sober ever since.
Do you know I saved his life during the Welcome to My Nightmare tour in Chicago? I was just a local news writer, and I was an Alice Cooper fan, and I snuck up to his floor, and he came out. He had a beer in his hand, and this is back in the days when you could get up on rock stars' floors, you know that. And a guy comes out of the right with a kitchen knife to stab him because he thought Alice Cooper had the persona was he wanted to be injured and his head cut off. And the guy was diving for him. I was 100 pounds, and I tackled the guy and saved his life. And I finally told Alice that story, and he goes, "That was you?" And I said, "Yeah." But I mean, there's no way of. Well, let's get back to this creativity thing, because once people realize, Andrew, that they have an addiction and that everything can get better. I mean, I don't know how you hammer that. I mean, you don't have to hammer it. You have to kind of. Well, what do? You have to teach them that they can be creative.
I think that there's a couple things that happen. When people are using, they're really paranoid and worried about their own drug use and paranoid about, what other people's motivations might be for, getting them sober or telling them that they have a problem and they need to stop using. And I think a lot of what we're dealing with there is, trying to really figure out, how to bring people in without feeling like we're promoting what we're doing. It's like people should be attracted to recovery naturally. It can't happen where they're coming in forcefully without understanding that there really is something real happening, and it's real treatment and it's real help. Because otherwise they feel like, people just want me to go here, and they're making money and whatever, and that becomes the big excuse and rationale to keep using.
Well, how do you? Gary Stromberg's our guest. He's written this great book called The Harder They Fall, and another one about executives in recovery called Second Chances, which we've all had. Alcoholics are the only people that actually get 2 lives, believe it or not. But you would never have gone up to Jimi Hendrix or any of these people, Steppenwolf guys, and say you got to stop drinking. But how do you do it now? I mean, we've got some pretty bright guys in AA. Who can I mention that's out? Alice is one. Slash
Paul Williams.
And Paul Williams.
Yeah, the point, and the reason that I wrote these books was to tell the story of prominent people who have been in recovery for a long time.
But how was it that did they have to fall to figure it out, or did someone
in each individual case?
Yeah,
yeah. I think all of us have to hit some kind of bottom, emotional, physical, whatever, in order to open our eyes and be aware of that we got a problem.
And this is one thing I think that's good about that we're more educated now. I mean, it's easy to say, then and now, but you have to really go back and think of how much less awareness there was about drugs and alcohol. And most of it was propaganda, and nobody knew what to trust. So, but we're finally getting to the point, I think, where that issue of trust, which was really ruined by the government with the 60s and all that stuff, that propaganda and the fact that we Schedule I marijuana and everything like that. So, now we're trying to figure out how to get information across that's really true, and that people can hear, and they're hearing it in a different way. And so, that's what's been exciting for me, is that there's really been an evolution in how much knowledge is available for people for problems like this, because a lot of people just didn't know, or they knew so little about it, and we still see that ignorance, and that creates a lot of the moral sort of shaming of alcoholics still, because people still are not aware of the fact that it's really fully an illness, and that all these new ways of treating people and helping people exist.
Gary, what can you say to people? And Gary Stromberg's our guest. He's been around. Excuse me. I know it's a cough button. Is there a cough button here? Because none of us is using it. It's all right. We're raw. How do you? And we're not talking just about famous musicians, but we're talking about people who call in this show and believe they're creative in their own lives. They're writing poetry, or they're going to make love to their girlfriend and they can't, or boyfriend, and they can't. do it without getting high. Creativity takes a lot of extensions.
All the role models I had when I was a kid were people who got loaded. I loved jazz music. I loved Ernest Hemingway.
Sure.
All the people that I admired were
Raymond Carver.
Yeah, they were alcoholics or they were drug addicts. It was, I mean, to be a drug addict was something to aspire to when I was a kid. It was glamorous.
It was romantic.
Hip. Yeah, it was the life that I wanted to, and because I didn't see the end result of those people's lives because it hadn't occurred yet. Those people were still living their lives and creating. I didn't know that Hemingway was going to put a shotgun in his mouth, and I didn't know that these jazz musicians were going to die with a needle in their arm. I didn't know that stuff. It wasn't out there.
There is some correlation, though, between the type of art that you admire and the process of addiction. So, right, I mean, it is all sort of man versus whatever, nature, and it's very sort of, highbrow, intellectual,
and create, and comes into
creative,
the area of creativity.
Right. But there's a lot of creative people that don't do things that are so dark, that don't generally become addicts. And so I always wonder if that genre of art that is so heavily based in drugs and alcohol is the voice of addiction or an addictive personality.
The analogy that I use that I like to refer to is that artists, to a large extent, operate without a net. It's very scary going out on a stage in front of 18,000 people by yourself and exposing yourself the way they do. It's very scary being Ernest Hemingway and writing words that the people are going to scrutinize and judge.
And even more so now, where you get instant feedback on Twitter.
No, it was scary for me for 30 years being on
scary.
TV.
It's all of that stuff.
Begging
scary.
Begging to be loved by strangers. That's basically what we're looking for.
So in order to alleviate that fear, drugs and alcohol come into play. It's much easier to go on stage. I mean, I'd seen the common thing was these musicians in those eras would get loaded right before they'd hit the stage.
Yeah.
So,
it's using it as a coping mechanism,
sure.
Right? And so I think that a lot of these artists that were depressive and dark also got into a place where they didn't have a way to treat their depression or treat what other disorders they had going on or traumas they had faced. So they would self-medicate with alcohol and drugs, and then unfortunately die from it. But we now know that we can actually get people free of those drugs, and then deal with what might be going on that's disturbing them.
But take it from us, especially Gary and I, because we did have falls, big falls, public falls. But, and I know it's going to sound to a lot of you out there who are having troubles, I've never had more fun in my life being sober. I mean, Gary and I, as I said, have coffee on Saturday mornings. We're with a bunch of guys who we meet them at a Starbucks and stuff, and I think I laugh more, we talk more.
Remember who you wake up with in the morning?
We know exactly who to wake up. We know who's not going to call us. But I mean, and I've been to some of the clean centers up north. Remember, I referenced to you, Andrew, when we walked out of the one in Long Beach, Astoria, Long Beach, yeah. That the people I walked in and people were laughing and having a great time. So, and I remember the first time I left our Monday night meeting once, I thought I'll never be able to go to a bar again. I'll never be able to sit outside and drink, which was I used to love to do in California. And I remember driving by a bar, and everybody was laughing and having a good time. I looked over, it was a Starbucks. I mean, so listen, if I can do this, believe me, and some of the friends and Gary and some of his friends can do it. And so you got to teach that, Andrew, don't you? I mean, I'm not actually going to push our centers because clean centers, we approach this in a way that's therapeutic as well as medical.
Yeah, and therapy is there's a difference between 12-step groups and treatment, and I think that's what a lot of people don't understand. And a lot of people think that going to rehab or a detox facility is something that you don't have to do. And unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of people now that are actually overdosing, or they're coming down and they have seizures and things like this. So it just as a public health measure, I always encourage anybody that's thinking about getting sober to at least talk to their own doctor, because there's real consequences to coming off some drugs if you've been doing a lot of them. This idea that you can just go, like, all of a sudden I'm going to quit and go cold turkey, which is encouraged a lot sometimes in 12-step meetings, is not the right way to do it. You need to be very, very careful.
But 12-step meetings are tremendous. We're not
absolutely. I mean, in fact, what I like is that they bring people to the table and they hear about recovery. Hopefully, they also hear about how to actually do the process of getting clean and not just getting completely sober on day one, because that can be for some people that's fine. For some types of addicts that's fine, but specifically with benzodiazepines,
we recognize that we need medical help, and we don't discourage that at all in our 12-step programs. We seek outside help where it's necessary or where it's
absolutely, and that's what I just encourage, because some people come in such a fog and they don't know.
If you want to see if you want to see how this all happened sometime, and let's make Shep Gordon some money. Shep Gordon was our dear friend for 1,000 years, and he managed a lot of these bands, and he used to always say to them, and the movie is called Supermensch, right?
Yeah.
And you get it on iTunes. Okay, Shep, there's your dime. But Shep, if you look at this movie and you see what happened to these guys and how they were put up there on the stage. But I remember Shep's greatest line in the movie was, to all the acts that he'd sign, he would say, "If I do my job correctly, you'll be dead. You'll die." And it was right, and he was serious about that. But Shep believed in karma. He believed in the right way. But just that was the time. The bands that you know now, we all know them.
Yeah.
People would be surprised how many of the big bands, there are at least one or two, maybe all of them, that are sober in there and driving some sanity into their music, and it's better.
Let me tell a story, Pat, if I may.
Sure.
I do book signings and tell stories from the people in my book, and I often get asked, what's the most dramatic story of any of the artists that you worked with over the years? And you would think with all the people that I worked with, it would be hard to pick one out. Sure. But I have one, and it's very relevant today. His name is Chuck Negron, who was the lead singer in Three Dog Night, which was arguably the biggest rock group in the world in the early 70s. By biggest, I mean selling more records than anybody. I think.
And my anthem, "One is the only,"
Yes. They had 19 #1 hits. They were bigger than the Beatles. They were bigger than the Rolling Stones commercially, in terms of record sales. Chuck went from being the lead singer in arguably the biggest rock group in the world to living in a refrigerator box on Skid Row in Los Angeles. He actually took me down to Skid Row once and showed me where he lived in this little indentation. He had more of everything than you could possibly imagine. He had more money, he had more fame, he had more success, he had more of everything that you could possibly imagine. Yet drug addiction took this man. He lost everything. He sold all of his stuff. His life went just totally into the toilet. And he went through 17 rehabs, 17 rehabs until he got sober. And Chuck's now sober, I think, 25 years, maybe a little bit longer, living a remarkable life.
God love
recovery.
him.
Yeah, God love him as well.
Andrew, how come it doesn't stick for some people?
Well, this is like when you go over to somebody's house that's first gotten sober, and you go through their house and you ask them where their mail is, and they inevitably show you like some giant box or whatever. And that's sort of how I see this thing, that when people are using, they ignore everything, right? And drugs and alcohol basically are getting in the way of you functioning. And when you don't function and just take care of things like opening the mail, you miss like a lot of important information, right? So it's just ridiculous. So
like pay your taxes.
Yeah, like pay your taxes and like the rent and whatever. But that's also what the addict is avoiding, because they don't want any pain. They don't want to feel anything. So it's really, the first thing is to get people like just caught up with their lives to where they are now. And that can be a long process. That can take 1 to 2 years. And sometimes as people start that process, it's just too much information too fast, and they realize how much they've missed, and the panic becomes overwhelming, and they go back to using. But so one of the keys is to sort of help people with all this stuff in transition and set realistic goals. When you get sober, you're not going to pay your taxes back in 6 months. It might take you 3 or 4 years. But you want to pay them back, right? If you've lost all your property because you never paid your rent or your mortgage and whatever, and the consequences of that, that's over for you. Sorry, But the thing is that you had a talent that happened that let you get all that. Or if you're really young and this is happening, you don't have a talent yet, you do have one that you will realize. And if you can get the drugs out of the way and the alcohol out of the way, then that life's there for you to be taken advantage of.
How come I smoke and you're coughing? This is a transference
fair, does it?
I've never seen.
It's because you found the cough button.
Before we go, what would you say, Gary? Because you deal with, I know that you help a lot of people and you talk to a lot of people. And between us, we must know 150 people. But what do you say to somebody who's listening now, who's in trouble, who loves rock and roll music, who's creative, who wants to be you, who wants to be me, who wants to be Andrew, who wants to be somebody else, and they're trying to do that. They have envy and all this stuff, but they just can't get over the hump. You've been there. I've been there.
Yeah. I spent a lot of years trying to create myself in an image that I thought you all wanted, and I thought it was prestige and money and power and all these material things was going to make it okay to be me. And I was chasing a false god, and alcohol and drugs were what propelled me into that lifestyle. When I finally crashed and burned and stopped and got into a program of recovery, what I found over a long period of time, and it wasn't easy, was I found my authentic self. I found out who I really was. And I had no idea who I was. Yeah. When I got clean and sober, I didn't have a clue what was underneath me here.
I wake up now, and instead of saying, who do they want me to be, I say, I'm going to be me today. Yeah. Andrew, a final thought from you on all this? There's a lot of topics today, and it went fast.
Yeah, it's just a lot of information, and it's just great to have great open communication about things. And I'd like to, it's nice when we have a show that's a little quieter and more like reflecting on issues more than just, getting into what might be the gossip of the day. So. Yeah. It was a great time. I appreciate it, Gary.
And Gary, you'll come back, right?
I'd love to.
The book is The Harder They Fall, and like Unbroken, just keeps selling. I told her, Hildebrand, if you stop writing books, maybe mine would do better every now and then. But this book is terrific, and it's a great example of what can happen to you and what can happen to you once you get sober. The Harder They Fall. Gary, I love you. Thank you.
I love you too, Pat.
Thanks for coming in. KLEANradio.com is our website. As we go out with a song that might have been trouble for Gary Stromberg at the very end, but now it sounds pretty cool. Our phone number to call for help after the show is 888-601-6040, 888-6040. There's a helpline. It's 24/7. I want to remind you before we get off the air, there's only 2 days you don't worry about, yesterday and tomorrow. Think for today. We'll see you next time. Thanks.
Are you addicted to drugs or alcohol, but unable to commit to an inpatient rehab stay? Introducing KLEAN Treatment Center's Outpatient Treatment. This drug and alcohol treatment program is designed specifically for the working professional. Don't let your commitments of running a business, taking care of a child, or maintaining your college classes get in the way of your recovery from addiction. With daytime, evening, or individualized programs, KLEAN's Outpatient Treatment will fit your life. Call now for a free screening. Professional guidance is standing by.